Hello, and thanks for clicking on Storytime with SlenderDad. This first project is called The Keeper's Cairn. It is a story I have been writing in my spare time here and there for the last couple of years. I am very close to finishing it, and I don't mean in the George R.R. Martin sense, where I've been very close to finishing it for years. I have about half of it written down, and I know where it's going. And so I thought it might be interesting content to kind of put together a little reading and do a chapter a week, so to speak, and put it up as something you guys could listen to. So thanks very much for giving it a try. Feel free to comment if you like it. Please give it a like, etc., etc. And with all that said, one final disclaimer: I am not a professional reader, but I think I do okay, so hopefully after all these edits and jump cuts and whatnot, it'll sound pretty good. So, without further ado, let's get started. Prologue. The deathly darkness of these dangerous depths does not defend you, child of light, though it will drown and drain your dynamism as it drags you down. Despair. The end draws nigh. He'll not lift you. The only warmth 'neath the waves is the salt, scorching your strangled lungs, stealing your sorry strength, secreting you away, and sequestering you from the surface as you struggle to send your sordid supplications. Scream, cry out, and let the water rush in. He'll not hear you. No wishes worm from wintry lips, and the waters weigh down words of worship, wending them to the wastes below. Wail, embrace the end, and let the cold wrap around you. He'll not warm you. Light's lariat scatters as it leads this low, and as your predicament lengthens, longer still becomes the throw. Lament. Close your eyes and fight no more. He'll not reach you. His bright blaze may be blinding above, but below he is the blind beggar, and I the benevolent baron. Believe, you are lost to him, and he to you. He'll not see you. Open your eyes. He'll not save you. You belong to me now. The Mad God's Possession. Multiple bodies, most already devoid of life, were scattered on the waves as they thrashed about the ship. Timbers groaned under the strain as the roiling surface of the sea battered her hull. A cacophony of snaps and crackles, audible even over the deafening wind and rain, signaled the mainmast was nearing its limit. Massive swells crashed over the deck, tearing away the signal lanterns, seafaring equipment, and even hapless crewmen in their path. This might be Waterstrider's last voyage. The wizard pushed the grisly thought back down. Now was not the time to consign oneself to one's fate. Sure, the situation looked bleak, but this was no ordinary ship, and these were no ordinary privateers. That's why he'd hired them to ferry him to Last Gasp, an odd spit of land, just big enough for a lighthouse and not much else, with an unusual habit of sinking beneath the waves seemingly at random. If any crew in the Emerald Ocean could weather such a storm, it was this one. As a fellow adventurer, he'd seen them in action before. "Brace!" the captain's voice boomed, somehow cutting through the pandemonium. This snapped the wizard out of his analytic mantra. He fell to a crouch, hooked one arm over the nearest rail, and held his wide-brimmed hat in place with his free hand. The covering was securely fastened to his head by a tied length of cord, but it was given to him by a dear friend after their first adventure together, so he didn't like taking chances with it. "Master Verges!" the captain bellowed as both he and the old wizard struggled to hold on against another battering from an errant squall. "Our ship's mage is struggling. I know you paid us good coin for the journey, but I need your assistance on the forecastle. Now." Marinallo Verges nodded his understanding and looked to the fore of the ship. The ship's mage, Odom was his name if memory served, stood at the bow, staff held aloft with one hand while the other was frantically weaving through a series of arcane gestures. The staff was ablaze with light, and illuminated the fore and quarterdeck of Waterstrider, but did nothing to impede the darkness beyond. Master Verges held fast to the railing as he climbed down from the stern and moved forward. It looked like the spell Odom was casting with his free hand was using wind to bore through any rogue waves in the ship's path. Another call went up to brace, and again the wizard managed to keep his footing and his hat. It was hard to tell whether it was sea spray or rain or both that was battering his hands and face. The winds were so irregular that gusts could come from any direction, and the drops they carried pricked like needles against his exposed flesh. Halfway there, he thought as he reached the mainmast. It groaned at his arrival, as if dejected by his presence. Despite its protest, he leaned his arm against it and took a moment to catch his breath. He'd seen too many years now, and even if he managed to survive this adventure, it was going to be his last. The spirit was still willing, but the body was no longer able. Another chilling gale wailed in the darkness, and something snapped above him. He started to look, but was tackled from behind in the same moment, taking him forward into the deck. Waterstrider's quartermaster had acted just in time to get them both clear of a falling yardarm that had finally lost to the torrent of wind and broken free from the mast. As Marinallo regained his bearings, he had to fight the urge to retch at what he saw. Tangled in a mess of frayed ropes, tattered sails, and splintered wood was the corpse of one of the young crew members who worked the rigging. The boy's limbs were twisted, bent, and broken. His cold face remained frozen in the rictus of agony he'd endured in his last moments. So young. "Damn it, Verges," the quartermaster shouted. "What are you doing up here?" "The captain wants me to assist Odom at the front," the wizard shouted back, not out of anger, but simply to be heard over the storm. "Then find your damn sea legs and move your arse! This ain't no place to be standing around." The old wizard got to his feet and steadied himself, but the ship was listing hard to one side now and didn't seem to be coming back to rights. He had to lean just to keep from falling over, and nearly had a hand on the deck to maintain. "Why is the ship tilted?" he asked as he adjusted to this new hazard. "Listing to port, lubber," the sailor corrected him. "And that's what happens when we start taking on water. Now get gone." Marinallo pressed forward, though his progress was slowed somewhat by the ship's listing. Lightning split the sky just as he reached the mizzenmast. He shielded his eyes from the sudden light, but still noticed dark patches in the clouds before the pitch black reclaimed them. Those strange shadowy blotches vaguely resembled a distorted face, leering down at the old wizard from the sky. He started to worry at something otherworldly. This tempest that seemed to appear out of nowhere caught experienced mariners completely unawares, and defied every effort by one of the most renowned ship's mages to get them clear. The thought sparked something, and the very immediate danger he was in seemed tertiary, if only for a moment. He needed to examine the cargo he was carrying. He straightened the strap over his left shoulder to pull his pack around, unclasped it, and threw back the flap. There it was, atop his spare robes, components, spellbook, and the few meager supplies he thought he might need along the way. It was the strange lockbox that had started him on this journey in the first place. A small container, only a little too big to hold in one hand, constructed from wood black as pitch, trimmed with brass that wore an unbroken coat of verdigris, having long ago succumbed to oxidation. Embedded in the blackened planks of the lockbox were dozens of tiny cat's eye stones, all staring up at him. They glowed with a blue-green light that practically hummed with magical energy. That's new. He pondered on what this development could possibly mean as he resealed the pack and pressed on. Further analysis would have to wait, however, as he had finally reached the ship's forecastle. "Odom!" Marinallo called out as he approached the man. "Captain Fairbanks sent me to assist. What can I do?" "You got spells, Master Verges? Get ready to use them. I've never seen a storm like this, and it ain't natural." Odom rattled off his orders without taking his eyes off the seas before them. He continued, now barely loud enough to be heard above the din. Seems like it adapts to every trick I use just to make sure we are well and fully up Shites Creek and staying there. I've got a bad feeling it's going to get worse before it gets better. As if on cue, the forward lookout called from the bowsprit. Something in the water ahead of us! Something big! I hate it when I'm right, Odom hissed. The sea swelled directly in Waterstrider's path, and a dark shadow rose up with it, still concealed within the unnatural wave. Then two tentacles burst forth from the water, one from the left and the other from the right. They trapped the lookout in a pincer attack, lashing him from both directions. The monster's clawed tentacles ripped the poor man in half, left naught but a fountain of blood, and sent the poor sod's remains hurtling into the sea. Odom rushed through another frantic series of gestures, clasped his free hand over his throat, and called out. His voice boomed loud enough to be heard across the whole of the ship. Kraken in the water! We need harpoons at the bow on the double! Master Verges could just barely hear Captain Fairbanks shouting orders to organize a defense against the monstrous creature. He gave Odom a reassuring thump on the shoulder and marched forward. Reaching out his left hand, the old wizard spoke arcane words, and the air rippled around his outstretched arm as a long staff of white cedar appeared in his grasp. The staff was his conduit to more powerful magics, and when it came to monster slaying, the more powerful magics were exactly what he intended to call upon. This is something I can help with, Marinello announced. He moved right up to the front as he ran his hand over the jagged piece of obsidian that topped the staff. The sharp edges scored fresh cuts on his scarred palm, coating both his hand and the staff in rivulets of sanguine. Already he could feel the power gathering around him, eager for a taste and ready to heed the call. The old wizard had spent so many years adventuring that he was as perfectly attuned to the weapons in his arsenal as one could hope to be. He began chanting his most powerful incantation, along with performing the arcane gestures to shape the magic as it manifested. Blood dripped from his hand, but the drops neither reached ground nor blew away on the wind. They just seemed to hover, perfectly round and still, in the air before him. A pale green eldritch light began to emanate from the obsidian, and the tiny crimson orbs gathered together to form one perfect sphere about the size of a fist. The Kraken, unwilling to simply watch and wait, lashed out in the same way it had with the lookout. Before its tentacles could connect, however, crescents of blood lanced from the orb, and with surprising sharpness and solidity, severed both the offending appendages. One bounced off the timbers and over the side. The other landed on the bow, still twitching as the ship's list caused it to slide across the deck and join its partner in the water. A horrible shriek issued forth from the wave. The beast wasn't expecting that. Verges finished off his incantation and punctuated the completion of his spell by pointing two dripping bloody fingers toward the shadow still hiding within the wall of water. The orb's mass surged forward as if fired from a long bow. Its surface burst to life with razor-sharp tendrils of living blood, writhing and flailing in every direction as it collided with the wave. It was difficult to see what happened next, because it was under the water, but the screeching grew much louder and more irregular, and the shadow was soon obscured by a cloud of crimson water. Satisfied that the creature was at the very least dealt with, Verges returned to Odom as several sailors arrived with harpoons. Not bad, old man, Odom admitted. I can see why they call you master. That magic isn't from my standard arsenal, Verges admitted, so let's just keep it between the two of us. Didn't look like Circle of Storm's magic, the ship's mage observed, but your secret's safe with me. Odom didn't know how right he was. Just as he finished the statement, his eyes went saucer-wide. The ship's mage reached out and threw Marinello aside. Dozens of tentacles had sprung up on both sides of the water strider, and were launching attacks all over the decks. Odom had saved the old wizard, but doomed himself. Clawed suckers slammed into his chest, shredding his robes, his leathers, the flesh beneath, and the lungs within. The impact broke the enchantment that held him fast to the deck, and drove the mage hard into the mizzenmast. The back of his head made a sickening crunch as it hit the mast, and he slumped to the deck. The rest of the crew had already sprung into action and engaged the enemy, so aside from Marinello, there was no one moving to help Odom. "My staff," Odom sputtered. "I need..." Master Verges scrambled across the deck. "It went over the side. Hells, it's bad, Odom. I noticed..." He punctuated the statement by coughing up blood. "I'll find the ship's physician," Verges tried to reassure him. "Have to go swimming for that," Odom countered. "He already went over." "Then I'll get Captain Fairbanks. Somebody can patch you up." Verges stood, but Odom grabbed his robe and pulled him back down with surprising strength for a dying man. "Listen to me." He hacked through the thick black gore that kept filling his mouth. "Listen real close. Get off the ship." "No, I'm not saying jump over the side. This isn't natural. This storm, these monsters, you brought something on board. Whatever cargo you're carrying brought this curse on us. I'm not bitter. This is a fine way to go out. Blaze of glory and all that." His eyes glazed over for a moment, then focused again. "I understand now why you paid our fee. If you take the gig and get clear, you might make it to last gasp. The charts said we were close. Look for the light." "I can't just abandon you all," Verges protested. Odom laughed, which sounded more like a croak and brought on another coughing fit. "If you don't, then we're all dead already. I'm done for either way." The ship's mage conjured fire in his right hand. He grabbed the old wizard's staff with his left and borrowed the conduit. He pressed the fire to his chest and hissed in pain as he partially cauterized the surface wounds. The move would buy him time, but with his lungs still filling with blood, it wouldn't be much, and far from enough to save him. "Now," Odom announced, "help me stand up. I want to die on my feet." Verges obliged his request. The ship's mage wobbled a bit, but managed to lean back against the mizzenmast to keep himself upright. "There's a gig on the port side back amidships," Odom rasped. "That's the left. Just get in, cut the lines, and use magic to push yourself as far from us as fast as possible. If that isn't in your wheelhouse, there should be plenty of oars under the benches." Marinello hated to leave it this way, but he knew Odom was right. He felt the gravity of their predicament, as well as everyone else who was still in the fight. He straightened up, saluted the dying man, and said, "Farewell, ship's mage Odom of Spider Silk Company. And following seas to you, Master Marinello Verges of the Sextant Adventuring Company." Odom rasped back as he pulled a glowing square topaz from one of the few pockets in his robe that was still intact. "Now, get gone." A half an hour later, Marinello was in the ship's gig with a few nautical miles between himself and the ship he'd left behind. Night had fallen now, and the storm seemed to be dying down. The old wizard swore he could even see a few stars trying to peek down through the clouds. Hopefully the water strider was still above the waves, but visibility was practically nil. He doubted if the mariners had even a single working lantern after what they'd been through. With any luck, he'd catch sight of the Keeper's cairn before it was too late. Keepers were wizards of the Order, like himself, but their incantations, rituals, and conduits were all purpose-driven toward maintaining flames atop lighthouse towers. The tower on the islet known as Last Gasp was called Drowning Man. Ironic names for both, considering the whole island would sink beneath the waves from time to time, and its one solitary structure had to be magically sealed against water. Marinello scanned the horizon, hoping desperately to spot the guiding flame that would show him his path. Unfortunately, that's when he noticed his passenger. She was a pale young thing, and her gnarled mass of black hair hid her eyes as she sat motionless on the bench opposite him. She seemed to appear out of nowhere, and when he finally realized her presence, a grotesque grin full of broken teeth was her only acknowledgement. The girl wore a tattered white dress with mottled black stains. "I told you before, there's no running from me. No matter where you go, I see you." The old wizard heard her speak, but was quite sure her mouth never moved. It just kept smiling that sickening smile as the words echoed in his mind. "What can I say?" He tried to hide the tremor in his voice. "The little rabbit runs, even if it knows there's no escape." "And do you consider yourself as nothing more than a little rabbit, then, wizard?" Marinallo put an edge on his response. "In this comparison, yes. I know what you are, Lana Trovos." That wiped the smug smile off her face. She clawed at the bench she was seated on with her blackened fingertips, and their jagged nails dug deep grooves in the wood. "Do not presume to address me by name, wizard. I've grown quite weary of this chase already. Your time is up." She leaned forward and placed her hand on his chest, just below the clasp that held his cloak and marked his membership in an adventuring party called Green Steel. Then her fingers burned through his robes and found flesh. Pain lanced through the wizard's entire body as her nails seared his skin, cutting into him as easily as a hot knife slices through a stick of butter. He couldn't hold back the screams. "Worry not. Your soul will persevere inside the lockbox for eons to come. Even death himself fears to look inside my creation." Marinallo's vision blurred as he tried to cope with the pain. He had to get a grip. There was still a chance to fix this. He reached to his staff, which was laying across the bench beside him, and summoned the power he'd need for his last gamble. He kept screaming, but instead of issuing forth pain, he formed arcane words. He grabbed the green steel clasp, hoping the emerald set within would be enough to hold. The little girl frowned, and the old wizard could hear her growling as she spoke, the last words he would ever hear while he still counted himself among the living. "No, you will not escape me, wizard. You are mine now." She pressed her hand hard against him and punched through. Blood exploded from both Marinallo's front and back. He looked down to see her arm buried elbow deep in his chest. She pulled free and leaned back, surveying her gruesome work for only a moment before flying into a rage. She let out a frantic scream as she grabbed one of the old wizard's legs and tore it off with ease, casting it over the side before wheeling back and wildly clawing him across the arms, chest, and face. It was a pointless tantrum, however, as the man was already in shock and unable to register what was happening. He was fixated on what it meant if it ended here. The weight of his failure meant others would meet the same end. If the lockbox he carried washed up on some distant shore, whoever found it would meet a similar fate. It could pass through many more sets of hands because he had failed to deliver it. That meant all the deaths that followed were on his conscience, including... Marinallo Verges couldn't bear the thought. Tears filled the old wizard's eyes. He fell back in a heap, unable to move. He was barely clinging to life, and the edges of his vision were going dark. Still, the monstrous little girl was screaming out her fury, but the sound was growing distant. It would all be over for him soon. The cold embrace of death would be little solace. So close. He was so close. A stray strike from the onslaught twisted his head to the side and likely broke his neck, if the noise it made was any indication. But it also showed him something he'd been desperate to see. In that ultimate moment just before awareness faded, when there was naught but darkness and cold, a flame appeared on the horizon. It was a few miles off, and somehow, even at this distance, it warded away the cold sorrow that had threatened to consume him as he drew his last breath. Instead, the old wizard died smiling as the waves shattered his vessel against the shore.